Okay, welcome everybody to our webinar, Why Virtual Welding Works, a panel discussion. We're very excited about this webinar today as we have a few speakers to talk about some of the most commonly asked questions when it comes to starting a virtual welding program. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We will be recording today's webinar and sending it out to all participants afterwards, and also posting on realityworks.com for you to reference at a later time. You can see on your screen, you have a chat feature on the bottom. We ask that you simply write your questions into the chat feature, and after we get through some of our most commonly asked questions, we'll go over to that to see what questions we have from our audience to ask our panelists as well. So I'd like to get started just to introduce who is on our panel today. First, we have Kenton Webb out of Tucson, Arizona. Kenton has been a welding educator for over 9 years and a welder for 18 years. He's a guideWELD VR user of ours and has been a great partner for Realityworks, presenting at some conferences on virtual welding and helping other educators learn some of the best practices in this world. We have Chris Potapinko. He is on our product support team here and also our lead trainer for guideWELD VR. He's been with the company for over 5 years and has been in just about 50 classrooms around the country, helping get customers started up with our program and train them on how to use our program. So he's a great resource to learn the ins and outs of guideWELD VR. And then we have Jamie McIntosh, our product manager for our virtual welding and all of our welding programs. Jamie's been with the company for 7 years. He was part of the initial conception of bringing virtual welding to the classroom and is educated with welding as his background as well, and has been to several conferences speaking on student engagement, welding, and also training on our program. So welcome to our panelists, and we're going to jump into our first question. So we're going to start with Kenton and just ask Kenton to tell us a little bit more about your welding program.
Yeah, so down here in Tucson, we have one of the largest high school welding programs in the state. So I definitely tried bringing in new technology and all of that. We do a lot of hands-on community jobs and projects, stuff like that, and is geared towards students actually leaving my program as certified welders as well.
Great. And just going to pass this over to Jamie as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been in a lot of different welding programs, and a lot of them really have the same, I mean, they're all different in different ways, but they have some similarities too, in the sense of how they're set up. A lot of times, you know, they have their welding booths, they have their workshop area and the lab area, and then they have the classroom set up. And one of the things that we hear over and over again, and one thing that's great about Kenton's place is just that is the amount of times the welders can actually get into the booths to actually do live welding, and trying to get that real interest into the welding classroom. So a lot of the welding programs that I know Chris and I have seen too has been those where they have that classroom setting where they do that classroom work, then they get out into the shop and do live welding and have that kind of connection. But also there's some challenges with that. Some schools don't have all of the welding booths for the number of students that they have. Some don't have enough material or welders or things of that nature. So it depends on the program. We've seen some programs being, 10 to 15 students, and then some where they have 20 to 25 students every class, 8 class periods a day. But throughout there, we've seen a lot of different welding programs in that kind of range. So. Mm-hmm.
So our next common asked question, and Kenton, will direct this one to you as well. How have you seen virtual welding implemented into a classroom?
So down here in Arizona, as far as my knowledge goes, is I'm one of the few that do have it implemented in the classroom, and I have, spoken with other instructors and have had a lot of questions regarding that. I mean, implementing it, I start off with my beginning classes, because what I found is I've tried some of my intermediate and advanced classes, and they tend to not like it as much because they've already had the hands-on live welding out in the shop. And it is a little bit more difficult than, actual welding. So I found it best to start off with my beginning level classes where a lot of those kids have never welded before, so they don't know the difference in between, live and virtual. So it's definitely helped them as they've started off with something harder, and then when they get out into the shop, it's a lot easier for them when it comes to the live application of it.
Thanks. And Chris, you've been in several classrooms. How have you seen it implemented?
Definitely, like Kenton said, is it's a great tool and utility to bring in new students to get them started with the basics of welding. It eliminates some of the fear factor that goes into getting them out on a real machine where they're dealing with the heat, the sparks, the fumes. But it's a great resource to have just in that safe classroom environment that's going to teach them all those core functions of welding and give them that immediate feedback as well that they're looking for. So just like you said, it's a great beginning tool to use for any of those new kids coming in.
I know for me, I've seen it for the beginner, and maybe Kenton, you can talk a little bit about this too, but one of the things I've seen a lot too is kind of setting a standard where a lot of the students will have to pass certain percentages on the reports and things of that nature to be able to kind of graduate into the lab. I don't know if you do that or not, but or there's certain safety things that you have to do and things of that nature. I've seen it for older classes, your advanced welding classes as a review piece where they'd have to start the year with kind of some of that review knowledge and kind of getting back into the welding, understanding after a summer off or things like that. But I don't know if you do that at all or anything in your classroom, Kenton, or not. But
yeah. So the one thing I did like is it does come with your standard WPSs that are kind of standard with the machine. So being able to go in there and make your own WPSs is which I have towards, geared towards what my curriculum is and what I want my students to learn I was able to go in, create, I've created, I think, 9 separate WPSs that the students have to go through and hit at an 80% or higher before they can move on to the next WPS. And then once they've finished, and hit that mark in the classroom, then I also have the guideWELD, live guideWELD through you guys, and then they go out and use those with the actual hands-on weld. So.
And that's kind of that thing too with one of the things that I like about, and a lot of instructors have said about this too, is with that WPS or the welding procedure specification, by having that, it's kind of that standard that says, yeah, you could do a weld and it looks nice, but you have to actually make sure that it passes the standard that AWS or whatever organization you're working with, they have actually set. So it's kind of that outside entity coming back in, kind of sharing that, saying, yep, it's great if you can do it, but you got to make sure you pass the standard. So that's where I've seen it and liking that. And you're right, I get a lot of that too from educators of saying, we have the standard WPSs, but we also have our own welding procedures that we actually implement into the software, and we can do that too. So I've seen that as well. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, we'll move on to our next question. And I just want to remind everybody, thank you for adding questions to the question and answer section. And we will get to those as we move on as well. So the next question is, how has virtual welding improved learning for students? So Kenton, we'll have you answer this one first.
For what I've seen is because they do get immediate feedback and they can actually see what they're doing wrong immediately as they're going through the weld, that definitely helps them for sure. And I've noticed, even with some of my sped kids, it gives them a little bit more, feedback that they need, and it gets them a little bit more comfortable using it before they actually go out into, using the real thing. And, it covers, your basic, work angles, travel angles, distance, and all of that. So, when I'm using that terminology out in the shop, it's not going over their head because they've been introduced to it through, you know, going through the virtual welders.
Okay. Go over to Jamie. How have you seen it improve learning?
Kind of to piggyback off of what Ken said, one of the things that I've seen, and I've a few educators who I've been in their classrooms, they've even bought VR, guideWELD VR, with special ed type monies and helping within that. And reason being is just that is because especially in those special ed type of groups, it is something that they need that help to get in and be able to have that hands-on learning, that understanding before they go and do the live thing. So a lot of times a little bit extra help or a little bit extra training. And so that's a big piece where I've seen it help. The other place that I've really seen it, and this has come from multiple instructors, and again, I've come from East Coast to West Coast, so I've traveled a lot, and so has Chris here, but is one of the things they said is it's improved not only student learning, but who's coming into the classroom. That they have more females coming in and taking some of their classes because they didn't really maybe want to go out in the lab, the welding booth right away. Once they realized they have some of those skills with VR, they've started to work in and say, you know what, I'm ready to take that next step. So the confidence level has been improving. I don't know if you've seen that, Kenton, or not, or Chris, have you seen that? But another piece that I've seen is not only, you know, those students, but it's also improved that idea of just the knowledge of welding, where they get so much more practice in the, you know, quote unquote, the simulated arc time, where they're getting that improvement. And it's because of a lot more practice where they start to realize, oh, I'm doing this wrong or that wrong, rather than having to go to the instructor and say, hey, this is the problem. So they have some of that knowledge base before they go in. So I've seen that. I don't know if you guys have seen that or you want to speak on that at all. But
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that as well. And, you know, it does help them build, you know, the confidence. And, you know, like was said earlier, you know, sometimes welding equipment is terrifying to kids and they're scared of the sparks and the heat and the fire. So starting them off kind of gradually works them into it and builds their confidence up to where they're not as timid when they get out into the job. So.
And to jump in there, just kind of in that same question, there was a question that was asked that I just got told about was, what is a WPS? And that's a great question because that's kind of what we're talking about. We have some students who don't know what a WPS is, and we're talking about, and so through this, they start to learn, and a WPS is a welding procedure specification, or basically it's kind of an outline or a standard of you need to have certain, you know, metal requirements and your work angle right and your travel and certain things that have to be correct to then have a weld be passable. And, you know, even that, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that are, you know, students don't maybe have an understanding because they're coming in fresh off of that and not knowing those things. And this is that first time learning it and being able to see it. And then not only hearing it, but then going and doing it and saying, oh, I got to hit these kind of requirements. And so they're putting kind of the you know, the knowledge into the practice as well. So I don't know if you've seen that or if you kind of have that stuff. But
yeah, I mean, it's just a good way to touch on all those beginning basics and get them jumping into this program, which is, you know, at that level, something brand new to them. So if you eliminate all of the reservations they have to try something new, this becomes a fun way for them to actually learn a new skill set, learn new terminology, and really open their eyes to what else they can do, what other skills they have that they may not have realized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, great. I think we'll move on to our next question, which specifically gets into guideWELD VR, which is the product Realityworks offers, the virtual welder that we offer. We're going to start with Jamie just to kind of touch on what our guideWELD VR is, and then we'll pass it over to Kenton to talk a little bit more about what he really likes about guideWELD VR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that, again, one of the great things about guideWELD VR is that as a product manager, I'm out talking to instructors, I'm talking to the educators, I'm talking to CT directors, I'm talking to administrators, and ask them, what do you need? What are your pain points? And so what we are able to do is always try to include those needs into our products. And guideWELD VR is no different. In this case, you know, one of the things that a lot of, two things that have come up a lot is one, and kind of talking about our being able to create your own WPSs, being able to create your own welds that your community might be doing. We have schools who say, you know, just down the road, we have welding jobs open. but I want my students to be able to get those welding jobs. We want to practice those same types of welds. So they can put into the guideWELD VR the exact parameters they need to, and then when those students are doing those welds, it's like, yep, this is what, you know, so-and-so company down the road is doing, and they can start saying, oh, well, maybe I want to work there. That's, you know, and so it ties in that career interest there. The other thing that's inside guideWELD VR, which is great, is there's a cost, material cost savings. So you actually see every weld you do, how much material you are saving by using virtual reality versus the amount of practice you'd be doing with the real thing. So you can see that cost savings. And so that's one of those things that I think I like most, and a lot of teachers kind of see that value in that kind of piece of it. And then it's just that that ability to be able to have that data side. guideWELD VR has a report. So every time a student does a weld, you can, or a welder does a weld, you can see that report and really kind of say, okay, this is what you're doing well, this is what you need to work on, and then be able to help that individualized learning. So I know I gave, you know, most, but I gave 3, but that's kind of the things, those that I've heard over and over. And then when I'm doing different trainings, especially with students, when they start seeing that report, that's one of those things they really like to see, because then it's like, oh, you know, how am I doing compared to another one? And they're really looking at their skill level. What am I doing, and how good of a weld am I doing? So that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, and like you were saying, you know, that's one way, you know, for an educator having that part where it does calculate. You know, I was able to go and figure out, okay, this is what I paid for the steel. If I had them do, you know, these joints, this is what it costs per joint. So I was able to see, you know, each class by the time they were done with the 9, you know, modules, and it counts every attempt that they do, whether if they pass it or fail it. So, you know, there were some of my classes, if they were out in the shop, they would have burned through $800 worth of, you know, material. And that's not even including the gas and wire, nozzles and tips that they would have burned through, you know, learning how to do it on, you know, the live thing as well. So, you know, it definitely helps educators, you know, kind of justify the cost for it in terms of, hey, down the road, this is saving us money. And for some of those programs that don't have funding for unlimited metal and stuff like that, it, you know, gives them a little bit more time to, you know, start them off in the class, but then still not worry about running through all their material before the end of the year's out. Another thing I do like, what I noticed with my kids, you know, especially with this generation, they are really tech gamer savvy, and so a lot of them look at it as a welding game, you know, so it kind of grabs their attention a little bit more. And also what I've noticed with my kids is, you know, some of them, they actually turn it into a little competition where if they see one kid get a 95, then the other kids are, oh, I can do better. And then they're going back and forth and, you know, trying to, you know, beat each other and have kind of friendly competitions and helping each other out as well.
I've seen that.
Great. To hit on what you just talked about with cost savings, either Jamie or Kenton could answer this. We got a question. How much on average do you think a class saves by using a guideWELD VR?
That's a good question. So you got to think about it for a while, Kenton, or do you want to take it, or should I?
I mean, just this year, so I have 4 beginning classes. Each class has anywhere from 28 to 32 kids in it per class. At the end of, after they've gone through it, we saved around $2,000, a little around that, just in those 4 classes.
Wow.
And, you know, $2,000 can buy a lot of steel. So it definitely, you know, helps.
Yeah. And I would say I did a training in, you know, a few trainings, and one of them I did with about 10 students in the state of Colorado. And we were there for 4 days. And I think with our cost savings, we were at the 4 days of about 4 hours a day, probably in the $400 to $500 range of straight, you know, virtual welding half the day, and then going out to the shop and doing live welding the rest of the day. So, you know, I would say, you know, it can save a lot of money in that world, depending on how much time you use it and things of that nature. But I know for me, from some of my trainings and looking at tallying those costs, I would say, yeah, that's probably a true statement there. So, yep.
Okay, jump to this question. And what key things would you tell others that are interested in purchasing virtual welders or guideWELD VR? And let's go to Kenton for the first answer.
Definitely when I have people ask, one of my, first key points is definitely having that calculation on your material costs. Just that justification there and seeing what it, would cost if they were actually out in the shop. And then, also, just like I said earlier, with the kids being more, tech savvy and gamer savvy, they do really enjoy doing it because it is like they're coming to school to play a game. So they, you get a little bit more buy-in and interest in that as well. And, it just definitely hits, the key points on teaching them the basics, what a 1F or 2F is and what, your distance, rod angle, work angle, all of that, different beginning level stuff. It really gets them, understanding that. So when you're out in the shop and you tell them, oh, well, your, travel angle was off a little bit, they don't look at you like deer in headlights. They go, oh, okay, I know. And then they can go right back into the booth and adjust that and work on that aspect.
Great. Chris, what would you say? Key things.
The biggest thing I would say is I think a lot of people come in and look at new technology with a lot of reservation. They're afraid to try something new. They're afraid to take on virtualization sometimes. But the proof really is coming out and showing that this works. And it works very well, especially with all the new students coming in. Like Kenton mentioned earlier, there's a video game aspect to it, but there's intrigue with technology where students and people just are getting that more and more. So as an educator, I would say, definitely don't shy away from it and look at actually embracing that and look at how that's going to bring new technology in your classroom and also bring that interest and passion from your students forward as well to take on these new skill sets and learn this.
I think for me, one of the things too is over and over, instructors will say, the time aspect is there's never enough time, and to be able to have students go in and do kind of that simulated arc, that welding over and over again, they can get a whole bunch of practice done in the virtual world that would take a lot more time in the real world. And so we've had instructors, especially even at the tech level or the college tech level, 2-year and 4-year colleges will say, when we do virtual reality and we use these type of products and guideWELD VR, we'll save about 2 weeks of time at the beginning of the school year by doing a whole bunch of practice. So then once they get into the booth, they have the understanding, like kind of Kenton was saying, of they know what travel angle and work angle is. They know how to go and what speed should be. They might be off a little bit, but they're much more aware of what it is. So then they're that much farther ahead in their understanding of welding. So then we can get started kind of faster and not continue to have the same mistakes over and over again. So you can do a lot more welding, if you want to say, the practice of the technique of welding in the virtual world, because you do a weld, you see how you did, and then you do another one. You don't have to quench your weld. You don't have to, set your weld. You don't have to do some of those other pieces. So you get a lot more of that practice time in there. And then it's teaching you what you did right and wrong, which is a help to that instructor too. That time savings of, okay, yep, I see my scores. This is what I'm doing well. This is what I need to work on. They start to understand what they're good at and what their problem or kind of Achilles heels are, and then they can work on those as well. So I would say those are some of the key things where when I talk to people and the reason why they love guideWELD VR, those are the things that keep on coming up over and over again too. Along with what Chris and what Kenton said, I hear that a lot too. So.
And, and also I've been, to a lot of conferences, and there are a lot of different companies that do make, virtual and live welders. And from what I've seen, Realityworks has the best quality at, affordable cost where, like I said, schools that may not have that much funding can still, work out a way to get a few of them in their classroom. Unlike, some of the other major welding companies, theirs may be bigger and fancier, but not all schools have that much money to purchase, those types of virtual welding than that technology just because of the price points. So.
Okay. All right, so it looks like we have about 5 minutes left, and we've gotten quite a few good questions from our participants, so we're going to jump into those. I'm going to start with the first one over to Kenton. How would you convince welding teachers that virtual welding can work?
That's a good one. And it, like I said, starting off somebody that's never welded, because I've been welding for 18 years. So when I first tried this thing, to me it was harder than the real thing. So what I've noticed is, starting those kids off on something that's a little harder, it's just made it so much easier when they get out into the shop and get their hands on the actual real, thing. So it definitely, I guess, starting sometimes things off harder makes it easier in the long run.
Okay. I'll pass this one over to Chris for you. How would you implement this into the classroom? Would this just be for introductory? Would you do it in conjunction with booths and class time? How would you recommend that they run a classroom?
So with just virtualization itself, it's great to have it as that starter piece for your new kids coming in, get those basics down and learn the basic terminology that comes with it. But along with that, using it as a tool to get that knowledge up and give them access to your shop at that point in time, you can carry on to teach so much more about the safety and what they're going to be doing out in your shop as you go through it. So I definitely think it's a good starting piece. I think with that, you can move into traditional instruction with welding and get them out on the machine there. But a lot of it is just taking away that fear and reservation that the students have and show them that this is something really fun to do.
Jamie, answer this one. Are there published studies to help administrators and teachers considering implementing VR into their curriculum?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it kind of goes along with what Chris was just saying is, how do you actually implement it? And there are studies out there, and the way that the studies have done it is kind of what we call that traditional welding, where it's you start in the classroom and then you go right out into the shop and you start your welding. And what they've done with the studies is they call it virtual reality integration, where you do the classroom kind of bookwork type stuff, then you go on to virtual reality, and then you go out into the shop. And so kind of like what Chris was saying, you get that knowledge, and then you still need that real live welding that will always be there. But when they've done that, and there's a great study. It's an Iowa State study. I think Realityworks, we have it on our website. We can share that study with the participants too. But it's a great study showing that when they did have different test groups, some with the traditional training and some with virtual reality integration, that they actually found that those who had the virtual reality integration, they scored higher and were more of the testers were able to do qualified welds, and they were able to get to that qualified weld in less time. So they're actually getting to that place where we want to see those welders in less time, and more participants will be able to get there then versus the traditional. So we really are seeing some studies that have come out showing that not only for the cognitive ability and learning ability, but also of just the quality of the welder can be better and quicker in that sense.
All right, a question for Kenton. The participant said that they would think that younger students would be stronger in participation, especially on the virtual side. What have you seen your enrollment like in your classes?
The enrollment in our district, we actually have taken on a Tools for Schools program where we actually do a lot of recruiting, where we have actually picked some of our top kids and we have made them what we call CT ambassadors. And we have set up with our other schools in the districts, events where we actually go out and set up a table and a booth and, really advertise what we do, get the knowledge out there as well. Like just for today, we had 400 elementary kids walking through and touring our program. And
Wow.
our CT ambassadors actually, run those. And we have used the virtual welders at our displays, and allows, so because we do have, cutting stations and welding stations that, kids or even adults can try. And, where some of the kids are maybe timid on trying the new, the actual live stuff, then they can go over to the virtual welders and at least get a taste of it and, see and actually try it out without doing the live thing. So definitely, with our recruitment, it has definitely helped as a tool to use for our improvement. So we haven't really had any, issues with recruitment, and every year we're, growing. So last year we had around 85 kids sign up for beginning welding. This year we have 98 kids that have signed up for beginning welding next year.
Wow.
And each, station, we do use the virtual welders as a station.
Okay. Thank you. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so I just want to thank everybody who attended today's webinar. We are going to send the recording out to everybody, along with some more information on implementation of programs like this, since we had a lot of questions around that. I also want to thank Kenton for joining us today and being a strong partner with Realityworks. And thank you to Chris and Jamie here at Realityworks as well. So thank you, and everybody have a great day.